Excuse me, did the king send you?
Hello and welcome back to the animation of Kingdom Hearts. We're going to talk a little bit more about the animation in this game and answer some of you guys' questions from previous episodes.
Come on, lazy bum. Wake up. You okay?
I guess.
Those creatures that attacked you are after the Keyblade. But it's your heart they really want, because you wield the Keyblade.
I'm so glad that you're okay, Kairi.
Kairi? Who are you talking about?
I'm the great ninja Yuffie.
So you might notice that a lot of the animations in this string of cutscenes here, they've not gone and created unique hand-animated performances for all of this. A lot of the animation in these scenes are characters in a pose, just kind of doing a little animation loop, staying in a pose. And occasionally they will do a reusable gesture and then go right back to that looping position.
Still hard to believe that you...
And then sprinkled in are a few unique animations specifically for the scene, like Leon trying to pick up the Keyblade, the Keyblade reappearing in Sora's hands and him looking surprised.
Why don't you start making
So even though there are hours and hours of cutscenes in this game,
Okay. You know
those cutscenes aren't all filled with unique animations, which is really the only way I think that they could do it, because, I mean, animating an hour and a half long feature film is already a big job. Considering the number of hours of cutscenes you see in this game, that'd be too much.
Everything changed.
Yuffie, go!
Yuffie!
Sora, let's go!
You know, Mandy Moore was a pretty good voice for Aerith. I don't think she continued to be the voice for... Okay, so that gag there, that flattened Donald in the doorway thing, probably could have worked a little better with a more exaggerated pose on Donald. As it is, it just looks like they kind of just had a regular standing pose that they flattened, but actually having his body, like his limbs splayed out more and looking all crooked and his face cocked at a weird angle, like the sort of things that you would do in like a Looney Tunes episode with a character who got smushed flattened in a cartoon, in a comical way. That probably could have been plussed a little bit, but it's just a small gag, so whatever. But yeah, like I was saying, like, I think she was only the voice of Aerith in just this one Kingdom Hearts game, but she was also a pretty solid Rapunzel in Tangled. Is Tangled gonna be in Kingdom Hearts 3? I can't remember. I hope so. That would be great. So we have a new Heartless type here as well. These little armored guys. They're still kind of erratic, like the other basic Heartless. Kind of really twitchy, kind of floppy as they run around. But they've got their own little set of attacks and their own animations. It is a pretty nice touch of how they, even though the different types of Heartless have their own animations and their own attacks and their own things that they will do, some of their own behaviors even, they do all sort of maintain a similar, consistent language of movement that feels like a Heartless. Some of the bosses may be more distinct, but the average small fry fighters all kind of have that twitchy, floppy, fast, erratic way of moving about a space. And the default movement of the enemies in Kingdom Hearts 2, are they called Nobodies? Is that what they're called? I can't remember for sure, but they are even weirder, if I recall correctly. They do find lots of interesting, distinct ways for their enemies to move around, which is fun. So I said that I was going to answer some questions in this episode from stuff that you guys asked in previous episodes. So let's go down the list here. I got a few of them. So I said in, I think, episode 3 or 4, I forget which, so that the reason characters will have a lower res face model for a lot of the gameplay and some of the cutscenes is so that they can minimize the polygon count and the bone count in the face and stuff like that. And it's also why a lot of games in the PS2 era would not model individual fingers on their characters. They would just kind of have this mitten glove hand with the individual fingers kind of painted on as textures, but that you couldn't actually move them independently. And the reason for that also being that it can minimize polygon and bone count. Like, to have a handful of fingers actually requires a lot of different joints. And the question was, why would you need to minimize bones in the rig? Like, is that for performance reasons, or is it just because it would take longer to animate all those additional joints? And I mean, the answer is a little bit of both. Like, the more joints you have, and the more articulation you have in a complex thing like hands, the longer it will take to effectively animate those. Animating hands and fingers takes a pretty long time, similarly to lip sync. It's a lot of really intricate movement that can take a long time to do. But the main reason to have a low-res face and to not model and animate all the fingers independently is probably for performance. Because the more bones you have that are animatable on screen or even off screen, just in a scene at any given time, the console does have to calculate the position and rotation of all of those different joints and use that information to determine how all the different vertices and faces of the character model are, like, where they are supposed to be positioned for any given frame. So the more bones you have in a scene, the more calculations the engine is having to make, and just the more expensive performance-wise it gets. And especially for earlier 3D games, this would have been a major concern, which is why, and especially like on the PS1 era, you will not see a lot of complex, rigged up and modeled characters. Polygon count was of course a big limiting factor for early 3D hardware like the PS1 or the N64, but bone count and rigs and other stuff were also limiting factors. And speaking of face models and rigging in the face, another question that was asked, can you talk a little bit about teeth? Like, video game characters' teeth always seem slightly off to me, but I can't put my finger on why. Well, okay. I can't exactly tell you why they feel off to you. I'd probably have to see the actual examples, and I expect they may feel off to you in different ways on a case-by-case basis. But as a general rule, our teeth are functionally pretty much part of our skeleton, and so teeth, as a general rule, at least on humans, don't move. That's just a general thing. That could be a mistake that some very early on beginners might make when animating lip sync, for example. They might move the teeth around in some cases to make certain mouth poses, but teeth do not move. They are completely affixed to our skull and our jaw. Well, I mean, not solidly affixed by, like, bone to bone, but you know what I mean. They don't move, that's my point. So, any movement you see in the mouth is the lips moving over the teeth, the lips and the cheeks, and the jaw opening and closing at the hinge, kind of right around your ear when you open your jaw. You can kind of feel that bone moving kind of from that main point of rotation. That hinge is kind of back there close to your ear. If the teeth are moving, then that's probably why it might feel weird. Another reason it might feel weird is just because the animation of the lips over the teeth, maybe that is looking a little bit weird. Maybe there's just some really bad lip sync animation happening. I won't get all into it now, but animating lip sync is complicated and time consuming. And because we are all humans and we've seen people talk a whole lot and we know what someone talking looks like, it can be easy for it to look bad. I didn't really talk much about that boss's animation there because I was busy talking about teeth, but I do really love the way they have the independently moving limbs sometimes kind of flip and rotate on their own. It's a cool way of moving around.
So, you were looking for me?
They too have been seeking the wielder of the Keyblade.
Hey, why don't you come with us? We can go to other worlds on our vessel.
I wonder if I could find Riku and Kairi.
Of course.
Are you sure?
Who knows? But we need them to come with us to help us find the king.
Sora, go with them. Especially if you want to find your friends.
Yeah, I guess.
But you can't come along looking like that. Understand?
Oh?
No frowning, no sad face, okay?
Yeah, you gotta look funny, like us. Yup. Whoa.
Yes, but one's on
That was a nice push.
Happy?
Okay, see there. See, that's some kind of weird lip movement. But, it's because he's... Okay, whatever.
That's one funny face.
Okay, why not? I'll go with you guys.
Donald Duck.
Name's Goofy.
I'm Sora.
Oh, I just thought of another reason why teeth might look a little weird or funny to that particular commenter. So, okay, so... We'll save it.
That little squirt took down that Heartless. Who'd have thought it?
Such is the power of the Keyblade. The child's strength is not his own.
It's so cool that they got all these voice actors back.
Turn him into a Heartless. That'll settle things quick enough.
I love it.
And the brats friends of a king's lap.
Or at least some very convincing doubles.
They're all built rats by the look of them. You're no prize yourself. Shut up!
Enough!
These games are so fun.
The Keyblade has chosen him. Will it be he who conquers the darkness? Or will the darkness swallow him? Either way, he could be quite useful.
Someone was bringing up to me, I think it was on Ask FM, that someone asked me a question about why game cutscenes tend to feel so slowly paced compared to film. And it's not something that I'd necessarily thought of like actively before now, but now that they bring it up, they're totally right. A lot of game cutscenes are very slowly paced and more drawn out. It's why you see games like this one and many others that have hours upon hours of cutscenes. Like if you go on YouTube and find someone who's edited all the cutscenes together into a movie, some of them last like between 6 to 10 to 12 hours. Like they can just be really long. I think part of the reason for that is because they aren't necessarily pressed for time. I mean, video game players are accustomed to spending a lot longer on a video game than they are sitting down to watch a movie, so the game makers don't necessarily have to worry quite so much about the player expecting a faster pace of cutscene. And so they also don't have to worry about being quite so economical with information in cutscenes or moving things along quite so quickly. Part of the reason I think also is because they don't exactly have a lot of film editing experience on a lot of these teams. Some game studios certainly do, but some don't. And so the pacing of cutscenes are not exactly quick or all that efficient with their information. Now that I have been thinking about it, that is actually a pretty interesting thing and something I'm going to be watching for a lot more. That may be another thing that's interesting to watch when we eventually get to that Final Fantasy series playthrough. Like watching how efficient they are with story information and cutscenes once story cutscenes become a thing in that series. I was talking about something else before. What was teeth? That's what I was talking about before. Okay, so I thought of another reason why teeth might have looked a little bit weird to that commenter in some games. Obviously, that could be, like I said before, it could be lip sync quality. It could be that they're moving the teeth for some reason during the lip sync, which for most humanoid characters should not happen. But the other thing that might be looking weird is just maybe the teeth themselves. Maybe the teeth model and texture just look strange. If you actually consider what teeth actually look like, all of the teeth are individual pieces of bone, mostly, in your head, that, I think it's bone, but they're individual units in your head, and there's like 30 plus of them, so if they were to model all of those independently, that would be a lot of polygons wasted on something that you almost never see up close in game, and that's terrible. That would be horrible for performance reasons. Like, you would go to that much effort for, like, film VFX, where you don't have to render it in real time and you just want it to make it look as realistic as possible, then you would do that. That's a situation where you might go and model all the teeth independently and make them look exactly like actual teeth. In games, you're not going to do that. In games, what you're probably going to do is create one big block chunky piece that represents the upper teeth, and then another one that looks pretty much identical that represents the lower teeth, and you're going to texture to make it look like there's individual teeth in there. But different games approach that in different ways, and sometimes teeth might just look weird. Again, I don't 100% know why. Without seeing the specific examples, I don't know exactly why the teeth look funny to that particular commenter in the games they're playing, but anyway. Now I've gone and talked about teeth so much that I forgot what I was doing. So, while I'm wandering around aimlessly, somebody else asked in the comments, what's an animator's point of view on sprite-based animation? Like old games that didn't have the power of 3D, just a few sprites and some text to give the player the information they need to understand the character and its thoughts. Okay, so here I need a pretty big caveat, because I do have to stress, I have not worked in sprite animation before. We will eventually talk about some 2D and sprite-based games on this series, absolutely, but it's not something that I have worked in professionally myself. So once we get into that kind of animation, I am not speaking from experience anymore. But generally, yes, you're right. Sprite-based animation is having to communicate a lot with a little. Like if you look to early Final Fantasy games, even into the SNES era, like Final Fantasy VI, some of the best sprite animation they had. When it comes to communicating character, they do rely a lot on the viewer's imagination to fill in the gaps. But yeah, in general, like old sprite-based animation, and specifically pixel art animation, which is I think what you were referring to in the question, but they would probably, like in the NES and even in the Super Nintendo days, they would not have very many individual frames of poses for each character. So for a story-based game like a Final Fantasy VI, for example, each of those characters would only have a small handful of poses, and a lot of them would be spent on just basic stuff like walking or making tiny little gestures during conversation or facing in different directions or combat attacks and stuff like that. So, you know what, speaking of Final Fantasy characters, let me find the 3 or 4 Final Fantasy characters in this town, and let's just look at their posing here. This is always a thing that I find useful as an animator. I mean, it's pretty animation 101, but still. So looking at the pose that Leon or Squall or whatever is here, looking at the pose he's in here, what does this pose communicate about him? And it doesn't necessarily have to communicate some huge, large thing about his character, but different characters tend to have different posture and act in different ways, and it can be really useful as an animator to figure that sort of thing out, especially if you're having to animate that character yourself. So we already know a little bit about Squall if we've played Final Fantasy VIII. We know that he's somewhat quiet and aloof, tends to speak in ellipses very often, kind of moody. And I would say that this pose achieves that. If I could just get the camera to cooperate, I would say that this pose achieves that pretty successfully. Leaning against a wall, arms folded. Having your arms folded is a somewhat closed off kind of posture, so I think that's a pretty good choice for him. But the way he leans against this wall is pretty casual, cool looking, which is something that most Final Fantasy characters actually, at least most later era Final Fantasy characters probably go for. Final Fantasy characters can kind of be generically cool a lot more recently, which I will talk about that later when we get to Final Fantasy. But anyway, here we got Squall has got his eyes closed, head down, looking a little bit bored and aloof and disinterested. I would say they have pretty well captured and communicated this character effectively just through his little idle pose here. Let's see if we can find another one. Maybe one of them is in the hotel here. Is anyone staying in the hotel? Anybody? I think we will do at least one more Kingdom Hearts episode after this, because I really should get to one of the Disney little worlds before we wrap this up. And I did have 1 or 2 more good questions that you guys asked that I wanted to talk about, so we'll do maybe one more. Okay, I thought we were going to be able to look at the posing on Aerith and Yuffie, but apparently they are not around here. I guess that's just not in the cards. Maybe we'll do that later. For now, I think it's time to leave this world and maybe head off to one of the Disney ones. So when we come back next time, we are going to hopefully be in one of the Disney worlds finally. We can look at some of that animation. And yeah, and we'll answer a couple more of you guys' questions. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.